Hi, I'm Yael Ben David, and I'm going to speak to you today about how to write microcopy that works. Just 1 minute about me. I moved from New York to Israel in 2007. I've been living here ever since. Before I moved, I did a bachelor's degree in journalism at New York University. And I started my professional career as a writer, but then decided I really didn't want to be a journalist. So I made a pretty sharp pivot and went to graduate school after I moved to Israel in neurobiology. And after 2 advanced degrees, decided I really didn't want to be a scientist. So I basically combined those two skill sets to become a UX writer for complex products after working on learning how to write well and tell a story, but also to communicate complex concepts to different audiences. I really found that first working for a genetics product and then in fintech on financial products was a really good fit. So before we get into doing UX writing well, let's just get on the same page about what it is. So my cocktail party line, because when I say I'm a UX writer, most people give me a blank stare, is when you open an app, the words you see on the screen, I write them. But that's just microcopy, and UX writing actually covers a lot more than that. It's all the words that guide a user within a product. That's the microcopy on the screens. It's the transactional emails that can be part of a product flow, right? So if you're in the product and you, for example, draw funds from a credit line and you get an email confirming the payment terms you've agreed to, so that email is part of your in-product flow, and that's going to be under the purview of the UX writer. It's SMS texts that you get, push notifications, alt text that you write for images and video, and GIFs for the sake of accessibility. And there's an emerging field called conversation design, where you're writing for chatbots and voice interfaces, and that's a whole different world. For example, when you're writing an Alexa skill, you can't rely on a lot of the UI elements that we're used to, but that would still be part of user experience writing. And it's all the words that guide a user within a product. So I think we all know, it's pretty intuitive, that a product without words is really not usable. And that's what we're responsible for. It's a really pivotal role. This is an example of the dash of my car. And I was driving one day when I saw this icon and panicked. I don't think I'm a particularly good driver to begin with, and I didn't know what this meant. I ended up pulling over, couldn't find it in the manual, and started Googling it according to what it looked like to me. It turns out I had a flat tire. One tiny label, a word, 2 words of microcopy could have saved me a heart attack. If only it said low air or flat tire or something and didn't just leave it to a visual, it would have been extremely helpful. Microcopy is really powerful in that way. It's all the words in a product, and I highlight that just to differentiate from marketing writing. This is a previous iteration of my company's homepage. And our website is, obviously a critical part of our product success, but this is not something that I would write. I would write, rather, the dashboard inside the product. So once you get to that homepage and once you register for our product and you're really inside and using our features, that's the part that I write. And again, like I said before, it also includes transactional emails and other elements that are part of the product flows. It's all the words in a product that help them interact with it. So any touch point where there's going to be an interaction is really critical for the UX writer. That includes buttons. Buttons are a good way to think. It's good to think of them as the user's turn in a conversation. So here, for example, we're saying add your credit report. And then when the user pushes on the button, it's their opportunity to say to us, okay, add, I want to add. They're really interacting with us in a conversational way. Menus that help them get where they want to go, obviously help them interact with the product. Toast notifications, which usually developers call growls. I love when I learned that the origin of calling these toast notifications or toaster notifications is because they sort of pop in and out of the screen like toast. But these usually are success messages, giving users that feedback that the way they think they interacted with your product indeed went through successfully. They can also give users errors, help them get back on track, but they can be really critical parts of the interaction between the product and the user. Labels, like here where it says home address above the input field, placeholders where it says search for address, and error messages if those two pieces of microcopy were not enough to get the user to fill in the field the way you need them to. Those are all really important parts of the words in the product that help the users interact with it. That's what it is, but why is it important? Why am I giving you a whole talk on how to do it right? Well, first of all, 2 reasons. It makes money and saves money. So let's first talk about how UX writing makes money. Because once you understand that, of course you're going to want to invest what it takes to do it right. Here's an example from the Google hotel search. It used to say book a room, but this was really early on in the flow. All the user wanted to do at this point is peruse available dates. They really hadn't committed possibly even to a location or to anything else. Book a room felt very committal. This was just not the headspace of the user at this point in the journey. So they changed this to check availability, which seemed much less committal, clearly no obligation, very early on. And it was very empathetic to where the user was in that moment. And it increased engagement by 17%. Now, this is really important when it comes to making money because this wasn't 17% more clicks on a blog post, for example. This is 17% increase in engagement, just a few clicks from putting down a credit card on a hotel room. And that's the revenue stream here. And more than that, not all of the value we get from UX writing done well can even be quantified. Here's an example I think a lot of us have probably experienced where Starbucks attempts to give you a personal user experience by, instead of calling out your order when it's ready as, tall double skinny latte, they write your name on it. And that can work until it goes wrong. My name is Yael, and a lot of baristas and people in general in English-speaking countries have a hard time with that. So there was one barista who thought outside the box, and instead of butchering the name, just wrote, "I am still going to spell your name horribly, horribly wrong." And that is an example of using microcopy, using UX writing, even in a non-digital space, just to give a moment of delight in what otherwise could have been a pretty negative moment. And no, I can't quantify the value here, the monetary value. I can't prove that this person then went back and spent more money at Starbucks. But it is known that when users have a good feeling about your brand, when they have a good relationship and your product feels good to use in this qualitative way, that it does increase their lifetime value. Okay, fantastic. I hope I've proved to you with enough real examples that it does work, but how does it work? Because only once we break that down can we figure out how to do it ourselves. So, of course, there are many ways. I just want to focus on 3 in this talk. One is that microcopy can make your company money by solving technical barriers. So just before I give a whole bunch of examples from the product I work for right now, Fundbox, let me give you a real quick overview of the happy flow so that you have some context for these examples. So first, to apply for credit. And this is obviously a high friction flow, right? So as cutting edge and, high tech as we want to be, lending and fintech are very highly regulated spaces, and there's no way to get around a credit application being very high friction. So ideally, after that, the user gets approved for credit, they draw funds from their credit line, and then ideally, of course, repay with fees. So here's a step in our application process where we need the user's routing number. And we found that users, it's not that they didn't want to give us their routing number, they just didn't know where to find their routing number. And so we solved that technical barrier with a tooltip telling them where to find what they need. Again, this wasn't an issue of having to convince them, having to, market to them why this was important. They just didn't know what to enter, and they had this technical barrier that prevented them from moving forward in the flow until we solved it with microcopy. Another really critical example, this would be the part in the flow that I explained where the user actually is ready to draw funds. So let's say this user decided to draw $5,395. Of course, before they commit to that and actually draw the funds into their account, they review the repayment plan, they decide over how many weeks they want to repay, they see what it's going to mean for their cash flow, what's their weekly repayment, etc. Now, we found out that a lot of users didn't understand the terms. So it wasn't that we were too expensive, they didn't like the terms or anything like that. They just technically didn't understand what we were telling them. So I want to draw your attention to 3 places where we tweaked the microcopy to address this technical barrier. One was at the top where they first decide how many weeks. It used to say, for example, 24 weeks times $263. Now, this is your total weekly payment. This means that over the course of 24 weeks, each of those weeks, you'll pay $263. Users thought that this was the amount of fees that they would pay, not their complete payment, including fees and principal. So what we decided to do was simply to remove it. We have this information below. There's no reason to confuse the user with it up top. Sometimes the best microcopy comes from knowing when not to write microcopy. So there we simply took it away. Here where it says number 2, we added microcopy. So we had the weekly fee before, we have the weekly fee now, but we added a tooltip with more information that the user needed at this point in order to be willing to continue. And the third thing we did was tweak microcopy by adding the word max. Max total repayment is if you add up all the weeks that the user would be paying, how much would it cost them? So here the user feels that they take $5,395, and over the course of 24 weeks, if you look at the repayment plan on the right here, they're going to pay us back $6,329. The thing is that there's a mechanism in the product where they can save on fees. So by telling them that $6,000 was their total repayment, they felt that they were going to be stuck repaying that no matter what, when they were previously under the impression that they could pay back less than that. So here we did 2 things. We changed the word, we added the word max so that they would see that this is the maximum it could possibly cost them. And implicitly, they understood that they could therefore repay less, and added a tooltip with more details. The technical barrier was that they simply didn't understand the terms. And the microcopy solution was to add meaningful label and tooltips, and of course to take away where we need to take away, to add where we need to add, and to tweak where we need to tweak to get the user through this really critical touch point when it comes to our revenue. Another way the microcopy can solve, can just make the product work and get those users to the point where they're benefiting the company financially is by expressing empathy. So here's a situation, again, we're in our application process, and if the users can't get through the application, they can't get approved, they can't draw funds, they can't repay them, and our company will probably not reach its business goals. So here we need the last 4 digits of the owner of the business who's applying, of their social security number. And we know that this is very sensitive information, that users were hesitant to enter that information without a greater understanding of why we really needed it. They had this hesitation that that's sensitive information, but we were empathetic to them. We added transparency. We met them where they were at the time, like in the Google example, better understood their headspace so that we could meet them there and get them through this input field in the process. Now, this is an example I'm particularly proud of where, let's say you're approved, you're in your dashboard, and you're deciding how much you want to draw. There's a button here that you would click on that says Draw Funds. The thing is that just like in the Google example with the hotel search, this felt very committal. Users were afraid that if they clicked on Draw Funds, the money would immediately be transferred to their bank account without an opportunity to review their repayment terms. But as we've seen already a few times, that's not what would happen. Of course, that's not what would happen. They would get to the next screen where they would review their payment terms before confirming that they wanted to draw the funds. So what we did is we thought about how we could be more empathetic, how we could better manage expectations, and change this button to review and draw. Significantly higher number of users made it to the end of the flow. Their hesitation was that they just weren't ready, but we better managed their expectations, and in a sense, we're more transparent about what was about to come next. And that was really the empathetic solution. Microcopy can also make your company money by motivating action. So this is a screen on one of our onboarding flows. You're in the application process, and we would like you to connect some transactional information from your business checking account, but you don't have to. I don't want to get into the details, but in addition to having users draw and repay funds, collecting this kind of data is important for reaching our business goals. So how could we motivate them to connect a step that was optional? What we ended up writing, and we worked a long time on this, was we highly recommend you add your bank info. Applicants who connected their business checking accounts had a 20% higher approval rate. The main hesitation here is friction. It turns out it wasn't even a privacy concern of why would I connect you to my bank account if I don't need to? It was more of just I don't have time for this. I don't want to remember my credentials for my bank account. I just don't want to deal with this right now. We motivated them by being transparent and incentivizing them as to why this might be a good idea, which motivated them to connect a pretty sensitive data source when they didn't need to. The most important part of this talk, of course, is how you can make your microcopy make money. Now, on a few of these slides, you're going to see this camera icon in the corner. These are basically the only notes you need. If you only screenshot these slides, I think you'll be able to take home notes that will allow you to make the most of this talk. I do think everyone will have access to the entire set of slides, but this is what you really need. So first, you're going to define your business goals. You can't write copy that will improve your revenue stream and meet your business goals if you don't have a really concrete idea of what they are. Then do your user research and find out what is going on with the user at these critical points for reaching your business goals. What are they doing or not doing that you need to change? Hypothesize what is it, is it an issue of them not being motivated? Is it a technical barrier? Figure out what you think could solve it. Test and repeat. And repeat is really important. I could say already that probably every single screen I show you from Funbox, from the product where I work, is not going to be current because we are just iterating and improving all the time. In addition, UX writing can save you money, right? So when you want to improve your ROI, your return on investment, there are two sides of that. There's increasing the return, but there's also decreasing the investment. Here's an example from Citibank where they had this onboarding form. They ended up doubling the microcopy in the form when they reworked it, which might be counterintuitive because a lot of times you'll hear about this golden rule, this best practice of being as concise as possible. In this case, when they doubled the copy, they found that users were taking 3 to 4 minutes on a page as opposed to on individual fields as before. But more important, 92% were completing the flow, up from 26% before they rewrote the form. What I really want to draw your attention to is that they were decreasing support calls, and that is saving them money. How does it do that, right? Again, only by understanding what the mechanism, how this is working behind the scenes, can we imitate it in our own work? So there are a few ways, just 3 of them we'll go over here. One is support. So as I showed you before, we had this part in the flow in the application process where we need the user's home address, the owner of the business that's applying for credit. The thing is that they can't do free text. For various reasons I don't want to get into, it's really important that what happens is they start typing, and then based on a Google API, a drop-down menu appears, and they must select the address from the drop-down menu. What would happen is even if the free text that they typed in was identical to what they saw on the menu, it wouldn't work unless they clicked on the option on the menu. So through different user interviews and testing and really working closely with the user-facing teams who are responsible when users got stuck for reaching out manually, making phone calls and helping them through this step, we were able to tweak the microcopy. We changed, for example, the label to specify that they shouldn't add an apartment, suite, or PO box because that was confusing them and they weren't finding what they needed on the drop-down menu when they included those. We asked them to search for their address instead of enter it, hoping that that would nudge them to realize that right now all they're doing is searching. And then if those two weren't enough, which of course they sometimes weren't, we had an error message that says select an address from the drop down. Really, really straightforward. And our sales team reported that this really decreased the amount of resources they had to spend getting users to this step. The cost was users getting frustrated, confused. What do I enter? What did I do wrong? And even insisting they didn't do anything wrong and giving up. And of course, dropping off before they ever get into the product and have the opportunity to draw and repay funds is a really big problem. And by answering this with the microcopy, we lowered the call volume to our reps, which gave us a huge savings. This is sort of an anti-example where what happened was, I can't tell you how UX writing decreased costs. I can tell you how a lack of UX writing increased costs. This email was written by our legal department, and it went out to a bunch of users saying that we were unable to accept an application due to inconsistencies in certain data. This never came across my desk for whatever reason. And within 1 week of it going out, support tickets doubled. They literally got thousands of additional calls of confused, frustrated, even nervous users saying, what inconsistencies? What data? 20 minutes of a UX writer's involvement and expertise could have really saved our support team that work. We also save on engineering, and I would say that this is probably where I personally am able to lower the company's costs the most, is by writing microcopy for our product in a way that decreases the development resources that go into implementing it. So this is actually an example from a product we've since sunsetted, but bear with me, I think it communicates the point well. We had a screen where one business could request payment from another business. And if they needed to cancel that payment, we had a screen that looked like this. Now, at a certain point, we got a spec from the product department that we needed to add two pieces of information: the net terms and the fee that were previously associated with this payment request that was now being canceled. So our amazing design team came up with this whole new hierarchy, this whole new format, which we felt was really, really good experience. The thing is, this was relatively expensive to implement. So I came along and said, well, why don't we just solve it with microcopy? What if we just add the terms and the fees in a text form? And we won't get the full benefit of the new design, but it ended up costing literally half of the development time to implement. And it was worth it. The cost was development, and the savings was by relying exclusively on microcopy. Now, this screen you've already seen a few times. I just want to draw your attention at this point to a different part of it. When users draw funds, so the user's drawing $5,395, we let them know that if they draw now, the funds should arrive in their bank account by Wednesday. Now, this user is probably drawing funds on Tuesday. The thing is, the way that it works is the funds very well could arrive by Wednesday, but they might not. It basically depends on whether the user drew before or after 12 p.m. Pacific time, regardless of whether that's the time zone they're in. So we thought about making this smart string, right? It's a smart string because it has a variable. Once it doesn't always say Wednesday, right? It says the relevant day depending on when the user is drawing. We thought about writing this really smart string, making it even smarter, adding even more variables. We're going to tell them that if they draw before 12, it'll arrive on Wednesday, and only if it is before 12 p.m. Pacific in this moment. And in order to do this, we had to coordinate with their local time zone and their IP address. And it turns out the payments team is a different team, it's a different code base, basically, than the team responsible for what the user sees in the UI. And early on in the discovery phase, we realized that this was just a really expensive solution that wasn't going to be worth it. So we said, okay, hold on a minute. Instead of making a smart string smarter, we can make a smart string dumb. And we changed it to simply, funds should arrive within 2 business days. And I call it a dumb string because it's hard-coded. There are no variables. No matter where the user is, what time it is, it always will say this. And this had actually 2-sided value. One was that users who would not have received their funds by Wednesday were now not upset. They didn't call support to complain. They didn't have a negative feeling about our product because we had better managed their expectations. But what would happen more often was that users who did receive their funds in one business day felt really great. They had this bonus moment of delight where we exceeded their expectations and they felt like we're a company that processes their requests really fast. Again, here there was a big development cost for improving the user experience, but by relying exclusively on microcopy without any sophisticated sort of code going on behind the scenes, we saved a lot of money while significantly saving our support resources and improving the experience overall. We also can save on marketing, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the term CAC, customer acquisition cost. So in our product, a user who finishes the application is actually not considered a proper user yet. They need to draw funds once for marketing's work to be finished and for sales work to be finished and for them to sort of move on to the product and support team. So users were getting this email when they were approved for credit. The subject line was "Your Fundbox account is ready." And we found out that users were not drawing funds. They weren't moving out of the marketing budget that was dedicated for acquiring these users because they simply didn't realize they were approved. We changed this email to "You've been approved for credit. You can draw funds now." It doesn't get any less ambiguous than this. And it really was helping users get past that point where we're no longer investing in acquiring them and we can invest instead in supporting their experience. Again, I want to add the sort of disclaimer that this is not what the approval email looks like today. As with pretty much all, if not all of these screens, we've made improvements since I put this presentation together. So how do you make your microcopy save your company money? First, identify the cost. What's costing your company money in the first place? And that's actually going to require a lot of internal research as opposed to user research. It means going to the support team and asking them, where are you getting the most tickets? What's the pain? And going to development teams and asking them what kinds of microcopy are the most difficult to implement. For example, I didn't necessarily realize when I wanted to make the smart string smarter how much that would require, especially the integration between the payments team and the team responsible for building the UI that the user sees. I learned that by changing that smart string to a dumb string, I was able to save, just like I was able to save by using microcopy instead of microcopy plus design to cut the costs in half of that implementation. Hypothesize what might save costs, test, and of course, as always, repeat. So it's your turn now to improve your ROI. To make money, I'll remind you to first define your business goals, do your user research, based upon which you're going to create a hypothesis, you're going to test it, and repeat. To save money, identify the costs first, do the internal research to figure out what is costing the most, and then hypothesize how you can fix it with microcopy, test, and repeat. I want to add to this that you really need to define your ask. When you say you need to invest a bit more in UX writing in order to get a really significant return for the company, you need to make a really specific, concrete, explicit, accurate ask. Because if the stakeholders and the executives and the powers that be, the decision makers don't understand what you're asking for, they can't say yes. Consider all the resources that you need, including time. Be as concrete and accurate as possible and share your hypothesis and your outcome-driven action. They need to understand, okay, if we give you the resources you need, again, whether that's time, whether that's headcount, whether that's just a subscription to a tool that might facilitate your work, what will you do if your hypothesis is correct? What will you do if your hypothesis is incorrect? They need to know what will be actionable from this process. And report your success. Please, get those examples out there. First of all, save a portfolio for yourself. You always want to have in your back pocket those proof of concept, proof that your work matters to the business success of the company. But please, I always encourage everyone to just get it out there. Publish your success on Medium. Publish your success on Twitter. Tag me. I want to see it. I want to use your successes that I hope this talk has contributed to in my future talks. And it wouldn't be complete for me to talk about how you can make your microcopy work if I didn't take just a minute to address some of the pitfalls you'll hit, because of course you will. One is best practices don't always apply. So I don't want to get into these, and of course this is not a comprehensive list. If UX writing is not something you do on a day-to-day basis, it might be helpful to take a screenshot of this and have it. But please know that this is by no means a comprehensive list of best practices. I bring it though to give you an example of, I'm sure a lot of you have heard that to be clear, concise, and helpful is basically the golden rule of writing good microcopy. The thing is that, at least in my line of work, when I write for complex products, concise is not always the right thing to do. If I don't give the user all of the information they need because I'm trying so hard to cut down on my character count, then I really have done them a disservice. And I've really actually decreased the effectiveness of my microcopy. So when you run into these situations, what I recommend is not to throw the best practice out the window. I don't ignore concise. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Just adapt the wheel to your car. You say, okay, let's break down why this best practice is a best practice. Where did it come from? Why did concise become a best practice? And I say, okay, well, concise became a best practice because users are better able to absorb information when it's short. Okay, so I want to reach the same goal. I want users to absorb the information. In my situation, concise may not be the way to do that. And if you have no UX writer on your team, this might be the biggest sort of area of troubleshooting. What do you do? So there are a few things that anyone can do, whether it's a developer that writing an error message falls on, if it's the designer, if it's a different type of writer who's being borrowed by the product department. You can always ask yourself if what you've written is clear, concise, and helpful. And that might seem really obvious, but you may be surprised that when you treat those clear, concise, and helpful as a checklist, you can improve what you've written. Bounce your writing off a non-native speaker. Now, for me, that's really easy because I write in English in a non-English speaking country. But wherever you are, I would hope that your workplace is diverse enough that you have non-native English speakers you can run your copy by. And I don't say this because your user base is necessarily non-native speakers. It's because if you can make your copy easier to use and easier to understand for anyone, it'll be easier to understand and easier to use for everyone. And non-native speakers can help flag those areas of improvement for you. Be consistent and correct. Don't make grammatical errors, for example. And even if you're not confident because you're not a UX writer in a decision you've made, at least be consistent with whatever decision you have made, because that will be better than being inconsistent. Read your copy aloud. If you've written something that sounds like no normal human being would actually say, you might want to work on it a bit to make it more conversational. And there are tools out there. I'm certainly not going to go over all of the tools out there. I'm just throwing this up here so that if you want to screenshot Hemingway, G Suite, GitHub, Cypress, Full Story, whatever, here looks new and interesting to you, you can Google it later. Thank you so much for your time. I really hope this was helpful, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yael, thank you so much for joining us after your excellent presentation today. It's great to have you here in the Q&A session.
Thank you for having me.
It seems that everyone got a lot out of your presentation there. So we've got a good set of questions coming through for us to talk through. So let's get started on them. So one question was about collaborating with UX designers. And it was more of a tooling question. So how do you actually find you collaborate with UX designers in terms of tools and processes?
Sure, it's a really good question. Really glad that we're kicking off with talking about collaboration, because that is key. Before you talk about any tool, it's about relationships. It's about getting in the right meetings. It's about even just being friendly does wonders. So in my team, I'm really lucky to sit together physically. We have a room, we call it the studio, and I sit together with the designers, and that is just like priceless. And we're really feeling how priceless that was now that we're all working from home because of the pandemic, and you have to like schedule a Zoom and you don't have those sort of on the fly conversations. So if you can sit together, that is huge. I can't quantify how much that facilitates collaboration. I'd also say you need to sync in both directions. So I work in a copy doc. That's the best tool for me when it comes to collecting feedback and iterating, because I end up working with a lot of different stakeholders, especially working in the financial space. I have to get a lot of input from our compliance team. And that works best for us with like the commenting features and things like that. And then my designers work in Sketch, and then they'll upload their deliverables to InVision. So I make sure that the most updated screens in their InVision are also in my doc in a table next to my copy. And they make sure they put my most updated copy paste it into the designs. And making sure that we're syncing in both directions is really helpful. At the end of the day, though, you must make it clear to dev what their single source of truth is going to be. Human error, time differences, whatever it is, they won't always sync up. And so the dev team needs to know what to use as a single source of truth. And then there are like tools that technically integrate, right? So the opposite answer from collaborate and sit together and be nice. So there are actual tools like Figma, for example. There's Ditto. There are more and more emerging all the time that like literally allow you to write into the design. But I feel really grateful that we're, such a well-oiled machine that we're actually not using them. I don't have access to Sketch, and I really don't need it.
Right.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's a really good response there. That's great. Another sort of related question here is, how do you work with other content people to ensure the content through different channels is consistent under that same content strategy umbrella?
Sure. So I'm the only writer on the product team, the only writer who writes the product. And I'm also the only writer in the Tel Aviv office, which is the biggest office. I'd say it was the original office. The rest of the writers are all on the marketing team in San Francisco. And there's a 10-hour time difference, which can be very challenging.
For sure.
So yeah, so we also rely on like sort of the soft collaboration, which is meeting once a week. The whole, like all the writers, we call it our guild. We wordsmith, we update each other on, what projects to realize, like to make it really clear when we're both working on two sides of the same funnel at the same time. We make sure we're aligned there so that the user is getting consistent messaging as they move from acquisition channels into the product. We also obviously have ad hoc meetings as we need them per project. We also have a Slack channel, and the Slack channel we tend to use more for actual wordsmithing. Like, I'm really stuck on this error message, and because I've gotten some feedback that it sounds harsh, I'm not trying to sound harsh. We actually specifically have this with the word just. So I tried to write, just fill in your address and we can move along. And a few people said, just do it. And I was like, that's not what I meant. So I threw it in the guild channel and got some great feedback. So that was really helpful. We also, of course, have, the more, not soft, the more technical, which is a style guide and a voice and tone guide, and we separate them. So voice and tone is more high level. And then style guide is like, no spaces around M dashes in this brand. Things like that. Hey, M dash conversations can get heated.
Oh, yes, absolutely. In the technical writing fields, it's a source of great contention.
Absolutely. Serial comma, I put my foot down. M dashes were a conversation, but we went with AP style guide in the end. So yeah, things like that. It's really, again, it's about open communication. It's about meeting regularly, even if there's no agenda. Just meet, just talk. And also we share docs early in the process. We rely really heavily on G Suite with our team. We use Google Docs like crazy, and just using the share feature with commenting access only, so no, mistakes happen. And just inviting each other, then me and me, them, to get in early and give like high level feedback. At the same time, making it very clear who's the owner, who's the reviewer, for the sake of moving things along quickly.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think collaboration is definitely key. That's for sure. So a bit of a change of pace here, moving away from collaboration and sort of moving more into working with devs. Do you use specific tools for microcopy content? And if you do you get access to the dev tool chain directly to actually put this content right into the product yourself?
So I don't. I have access to view our GitHub if I want to run queries and searches and try to like find places where we use, let's say, like we had this project where I had to replace the word fees with the word interest in a lot of places, so I can access GitHub and do a search and make sure I'm not missing, places in the code where that is. But especially since there's a lot of legacy, we are about to celebrate our 8th birthday, and I've been with the company just over 2 years. Thank you. So there's a lot of like sort of old, and I'm the first like proper UX writer, so a lot has been written very sort of ad hoc, and so I can access the code if I need to. But there are other companies that do this differently. So John Sato is someone who I really recommend sort of looking up his Medium blog. He doesn't write very frequently, but he writes very tactical, useful, like in the trenches stuff. And I think he actually managed at Dropbox to make it, so like set up a process so that writers can edit the code directly. And if you want something like, if that makes your dev team uncomfortable, there is a tool called Strings, which is new. And so far seems fantastic. I had like a long talk with one of the founders, and I love the direction, I love their approach. And one of the things they do is they have an interface where the writer can make edits, but then they send a push request to the devs and they have to merge. So they have control. They don't get nervous that you're going to break anything. But you can still not need to like open that Jira ticket and go through this like arduous process that doesn't always need to be. And there was one more tool I wanted to mention.
Might have to save that over for the hallway conversations, Yael, because I can't believe it, but we're out of time already.
Oh my God.
I know.
Oh man,
Yeah.
there were more questions I wanted to answer.
Look, we can go and break those out into the next conference session. But look, thank you again for coming in and answering the questions, Yael. And let's head on back over to the main stage, and we'll get ready for the next one.